my guest, enough about me, a wonderful young pianist, Russian-American pianist, Vassily Primakov. And together we're going to be performing for you the ever-favorite Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto, made so popular again, if it needed to be made popular again, by Van Cliburn. And you will all remember that Van came here and performed it with us here and was very impressed with the orchestra. And at the same time really played a vintage performance. You know, with Van, you never really know. I mean, it can be incredible or it can be not so incredible. But we really were fortunate in having one of the incredible performances. And so, Vassily, though you've been here before, and therefore some of us will remember you, I thought, since you may be new to a great many of our audience, particularly those who are watching at home, that I would start out by asking you a little bit about your background.
All right. Well, I was born in Moscow, in, beautiful town, and grew up there until I was 17. Studied with a wonderful teacher who was a pupil of Neuhaus, so I actually have an interesting musical background that way, because Neuhaus was the teacher not only of my teacher, Gorno Staiva, but Victor and Gilels, so it's great traditions, great Russian music traditions. Then at 17 I came to this country, and actually first I came to California, and I was studying with my teacher to be at Juilliard School, Jerome Lowenthal. He also does classes, teaches at the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara. So I was there for 2 summers in a row, and then I went on to study at Juilliard and do my bachelor's and master's. And in 2002, that's, I guess, the year that really my career in this country took off, because I won the Young Concert Artist International Competition in New York, and that really helped me, enabled me to start performing a lot, because that's really the prize. If you win the first prize there, it's they help young musicians to get exposed to the American audiences. They book a lot of concerts, so I started playing quite a bit, and it was actually that time when I first came to play with West Symphony.
Now, you were born under the Soviet system?
I was born under the Soviet system, yes. It was, I can say I was in 1979, so I actually remember that whole change. It was kind of weird, because I remember first it was the Soviet Union, and then it was the Perestroika. During the Perestroika, I remember standing in lines with my grandmother, who, of course, went through World War II, and I remember she was telling me this is worse, because we had coupons for sugar and all the necessities, like bread and so on. So, and then everything changed again, and as a young boy, for me, the first impression was history course. I remember first when I started taking class at school, history, just regular history, we had those textbooks that were saying basically Lenin is the best, and there was no real history before Lenin or Stalin. None of it existed, so to speak. I mean, what do I know? I was 9, 10 years old. But then, you see, they asked us to throw those textbooks away and then kind of start all over again. So it was very confusing. And if anything, I still don't know much about Russian history because of that, because it was really confusing time.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin was that the Soviet Union was incredibly supportive of the arts.
That's true.
And as a young musician growing up in the Soviet Union, I cannot think of a place or a system that aided artists more than existed under those circumstances, because when you were a young child, if you showed any talent at all, immediately you were taken to the best teachers, and you were fostered. Your career was developed. I mean, basically, you really didn't have to do anything. Gus Concert looked after everything.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's very different than our system here, and very different than the system is now in Russia. Now, when you started out, do you still remember that system? And was it the point?
Yes.
I can't remember my dates exactly when Perestroika started.
Well, the late 80s, like 88, 89.
Yeah. So you were already kind of taken up by the system as being a young talent worthy of recognition. Did your parents have an interest in music? Does this come through sort of is it in the genes?
I would say so, yes. My mom was a pianist and a teacher, and so I grew up surrounded by a lot of music, a lot of just all sorts of art, because my mom was friends with a lot of musicians, a lot of actors in Russia. So I've always, as a boy, witnessed a lot of rehearsals, a lot of readings of poetry and all sorts of different authors. You have to understand also, in Soviet Union, there was a lot of forbidden stuff. Like, for example, Bulgakov was not supposed to be read. So, then in the 80s it started being better, but my mom still had copies of Bulgakov's books, like Master and Margarita, that was typewritten, and then it was just copied, and, people just passed it along.
Well, I remember when I first toured the Soviet Union, I had as a translator, Masha Greenberg. You probably wouldn't remember her anyway. Her father was the head of the Philharmonic in Moscow, and she, of course, spoke English beautifully. But her great thirst was for stuff from the West. Oh. And I kept sending books, records, and all sorts of stuff. And we retained contact for quite a while after that because of that thirst. I mean, it was, there were sort of positives and many negatives, of course, at the same time. This is a political system. We're not going there. But, I mean, as a musical system, it had a lot to recommend it in the sense of really being able to take talent for what it was and do something with it. On the other hand, from a compositional standpoint, it was very repressive, because composers like Prokofiev and Shostakovich were repressed. They were told what to write and how to write it. And if they didn't...
Musicians were repressed as well. I'm just starting a very small project with my partner. We're opening up a record label, and we're trying to promote young artists sort of like ourselves. But also, we try to promote some of the archival recordings from Soviet Union era. My former teacher, Gorna Staeva, she's still teaching at the Moscow Conservatory, but now she's in her late 80s. She doesn't perform anymore. But in her day, she was one of the greatest performers, and truly was. But she was blacklisted because she was very outspoken. She was religious, and that was not something that you do. She was friends with Solzhenitsyn. That was another no-no. And so therefore, what was happening to her between the 60s and 80s, she would get invitations from the West to come perform. But every time she would apply for a visa, she was denied. So basically for 20-something years, at a peak of her career, she was just banned from the West. So therefore, her career never really took off in America or anywhere else. She performed in Soviet countries. So we're actually bringing, because archives are filled with her recordings, we're actually bringing some of those and trying to release them.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Of course, it's very true. I mean, in a way, they controlled any export of their own culture.
Like Victor and Gilels, the biggest ones. But we had so many great artists that just completely unknown in this country.
Well, they were very fearful people would simply leave and go to the West, that they would renounce the Soviet system and they would leave. And a number did. I was helpful to Baryshnikov, for example, in his escape in Toronto. And so a number of people did. And some people were actually able to kind of, like Rostropovich was able to do it kind of legally, if you will. But it wasn't easy. It was not easy for sure. Your teaching at that point, the kind of instruction that you got, in what way was it special to you?
It's hard to answer, actually.
I mean, in comparison with what you see around you now in North America.
In so many ways it's the same, because, when I came to Juilliard, I studied with Jerry Lowenthal, who's one of the, I think, great teachers, and he has an interesting background. He also has, teachers like William Capel, but at the same time he studied in Europe and he studied with Courteau, so it's an interesting combination. Russian school is very possessive. I would say, like, if I would simplify it, you come to a teacher and you sort of belong to a teacher. It's not bad, but there are some perks that you kind of miss. Like, for example, when I came to this country, I remember I was sort of stunned that even though you have your teacher, you're still allowed to go and take master classes from other teachers. So it's more open-minded. In Russia, the tradition is different. You stick to one teacher, and God forbid if she or he finds out that you were sneaking around and playing for somebody else. That will become like. So in other words, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of possessive.
Well, it's not only in the Soviet Union. I mean, I remember in my case of my brother was studying with Leonard Rose as a very young kid, along with Yo-Yo Ma. Both of them were kids studying together with Leonard Rose. And my parents were very much of this open the doors philosophy, and they had him play for Rostropovich when he was in Montreal. And Rostropovich offered him a place in Moscow to come and study with him. And Leonard Rose was extremely angry to the point where he just said, okay, that's it, I don't want to teach you anymore. So it happens here too. Would you like to play something for us?
Of course. Yeah.
What?
I'll play Chopin Mazurka.
Lovely. You play in a very rhapsodic way. Very beautiful. Really lovely. Wonderful to hear you. Of course, it'd be difficult to dance to that, but voila, I mean, it's like a waltz.
None of them were really meant to be danced to, Some. It's interesting.
Well, it's like the tango, right?
Yeah.
They weren't?
No, they weren't.
So?
As a matter of fact, I mean, even in some of his letters, he kind of states it. Some of them are more danceable, but a lot of them are sort of as a personal pages in his diary. They're more intimate. More about nostalgia of his own country and his. I think mazurkas are extremely personal pieces.
Yes, of course, in the case of the Chopin, they would be. You're going to play with an orchestra, obviously, with us. In what way is playing with an orchestra different than playing on your own like this?
In some ways, it's so much more fun because you're being collaborating with a lot of musicians and of course the conductors. So it's kind of you're not there on your own. You're actually being supported by a number of musicians. So it's kind of this unity that gives you this extra special energy. Because performing, I love performing as a soloist, just on my own. But it's a lot of responsibility. You're there for a whole recital and. Takes a lot of strength and stamina, and emotionally it can be exhausting. Not to say that it's not, when you play with orchestra, but it's if it's a great experience, it's just of course the repertoire again. Like playing something like that, Tchaikovsky concerto. That for me, I've played it a few times. It's so beautifully orchestrated. You never feel like, you're drowned by orchestra. Like, in Rachmaninoff's second concerto, as beautiful as it is, the way it's orchestrated, it's sort of almost like a silent film, in the first movement, because the orchestra plays, and it's actually written mezzo forte there, in the main theme, but it's so hard to get through that thickness. In Tchaikovsky, I find it's really rewarding, it's somehow balanced that, maybe only at the very end, when we get to the last few pages. But that's okay, the theme is so beautiful, nobody wants to hear the piano anyway.
Well, I wouldn't say that. It becomes part of the texture,
Yeah.
To what extent, though, have we become used to false relationships because of CDs and discs? I mean, basically recording, where you can put a microphone inside the piano, literally, and it's a recording engineer, really, who basically creates the balance between yourself and the orchestra. You get to a concert, and all of a sudden, it's not quite the same. The orchestra can't produce the kind of pianissimo, particularly in forte passages, so that there's an equilibrium between the piano and yourself. Comment a little bit on that. Does that create, in your opinion, a false expectation of the audience?
Oh, absolutely. I've had experience myself, actually, because I've done a number of recordings, with orchestra, and it's very different because, as a pianist, I'm used to sort of playing out because, you play with orchestra, usually it's big halls, halls that sit more than 1,000 people. So therefore, you kind of play for the last row. Even the pianissimo has to be projecting so the people in the last row will hear you. When you have microphones set up, basically the balance has to be different. You have to play for the microphone, which is right here, and not for the last row. So I did a recording of Dvorak Piano Concerto, which is actually rarely played. And
beautiful piece, actually.
Yeah, beautiful. It's really great, and it's beautifully orchestrated. So I get invited I played in South Africa this last year, and one of the orchestras asked me if I could play the Dvorak Concerto. I said, absolutely. So we played 2 performances. It was a great experience. And then we get the review, and there was a very positive review from the critic. But it happened that the critic heard my recording beforehand. And so in one of the paragraphs, he starts saying, well, it wasn't as smooth and so on as the recording, it had some rough places, maybe balance wasn't always great. And I was reading it thinking that, but why are you even comparing it? It's a recording where people took takes and takes, and then you are absolutely right. The sound engineer balances it all out. I've been to those mastering sessions when they say, oh, we can't hear the piano. Let's bring up the piano. Oh, the flute is too much of the flute here. Let's get rid of the flute. So somebody told me once, it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, recordings are wonderful, and for performers, I think it's the only way that we can sort of put a page in history, sort of like something that's out there. But because live performance, it's live performance, and that's it, and it's gone. People, of course, have memories of it, but this is something that's going to stay forever. But it's a completely different art form. It's, I can't compare.
Well, that's why Glenn Gould, stopped playing because he felt that it was simply not something he could control. He was nervous anyway as a person, and he felt that in recording he could somehow control both from his own point of view and also the orchestra, and really give the very best possible of himself. And he said, well, we have these inventions today. Why bother to go through the nonsense of traveling and using other people's instruments and going on and on and on and sort of going up there like a circus performer.
Yeah. But you can't recreate the energy,
I agree with you.
That special moment that, as an audience, I'm sure you go to a performance and you feel something in the air. The music is right there, with you. And of course it depends on how performers are feeling. Somebody may be sick or somebody may be not quite in the mood. So you'll never, it's not guaranteed that it's going to be great. But, if it is, if everybody's on, then it's, there's no recording that can compare to it.
Absolutely. Well, today, there is a movement in the direction of recording both concerts and opera. They started with opera, the Met, live at the Met,
yes.
And they put them all the theaters all over the place, and they do interviews, and you see backstage and the camera angles and all. Yeah. It's sort of a little bit like going to a hockey game. In a sense, you go to a hockey game, you sit in the front row of the hockey game, and you sit in center ice, and all of a sudden they score a goal over there or over there. Well, you can't see it because unless you look up at the television screens above you, you can't really see it close up. You can, of course, you can sort of investigate the poor tenor's tonsils if you wish, if the camera angle is right. But they're doing that a lot, and now with the LA Philharmonic, for example, they are now broadcasting HD, concerts
yes.
For movie theaters. And I had quite a discussion with an arts patron the other day about it, and he said, well, that's the thing of the future. The thing of the future is being able to see and hear the best on a movie screen. And I had quite a disagreement with him because I said, I don't agree with you at all. The next thing we'll be meeting people and having relationships on television. And it's already happening. We're having relationships on computers. People court on computers all the time. And when they finally meet each other, boy, are they surprised.
I would say court is not the right word,
Well, I'm trying to be polite. In any case, I think this is a kind of antiseptic part of our own culture. That it's so electronically connected that we're actually disconnected because there really is no physical connection.
Yeah,
it's all in the ether.
I'm 50-50 about it because on one hand, as long as it helps to promote the arts,
yeah, but it does. That's the question. Will it, or will it supplant it?
Yeah,
that's the question. You don't know. If somebody can go in a movie theater in Thousand Oaks or Ventura or Oxnard and see, first quality, high definition, Blu-ray. The finest orchestras in the world. How's that going to affect the new West Symphony? Are they going to want to come to the new West Symphony? Will they be able to tell the difference? Will they be able to perceive the energy of the live performance?
That's a good point. Yes.
We don't know.
A lot of people will say, "Why bother?" If it's in a theater near you, it's or it's going to come out on DVD. The immediate reaction will be like, "Oh, I'll just wait till it comes out on DVD."
Yeah, and it's even that, in the sense that we don't want to go to the theater. It's a pain in the neck. We have to park, and let's wait till it comes out on DVD. We can watch it in our pajamas at home, or without pajamas. Anyway, so now you're going to play Tchaikovsky Concerto. That's a work that has a long history. You think of, as I said, Van Cliburn, the winning of the Tchaikovsky competition. It's a work where the audience almost knows every note.
Yes, they do.
How does that challenge you? In what way does that change, or does it change anything that you do?
The thing is, there was a part of me at some point, because, I've been playing this piece on and off for quite some time. And, there was a time, I remember, I thought, oh, God, not again. And I remember what happened was sort of a miracle. I started playing it with orchestra. It was one of the first rehearsals, And then suddenly, I hear the music, and it's just it's so wonderful. Somehow, this music, you don't get tired of it. Even though, as a youngster, I grew up hearing it all the time, especially when Tchaikovsky competition, everybody's preparing for it. So you go through the conservatory, and every single practice room is Tchaikovsky first, Tchaikovsky first, Tchaikovsky first. And I was sort of like, my God, I hope that I will never play the piece. And then, of course, I came to this country, and actually the first performance I ever gave of this piece was with Giselle Bindor. She was conducting Santa Barbara Symphony.
Yes.
And that was, I would say, in 99, A while ago.
History.
Yeah. Well, a while ago.
Yes.
And since then, it's a popular piece. People love it. So, a lot of times, and I'm Russian, of course, so, people assume that I have it in my repertoire. And, but in terms of like people knowing every note, well, so they do, and, I'd like to think that I sort of do too, and
I'm sure you do.
And I just try to kind of every time to look at it from a very fresh perspective, to see where it's going to take me, because you collaborate with different conductors, therefore it's inevitable there's going to be slightly different interpretation.
Of course.
And I'm open for it, so because,
That's good to know.
It's it's like exploring.
We haven't yet rehearsed together, you see, that happens tonight. So.
Yeah. But, I recently discovered, and I knew the piece, but I rediscovered the second concerto.
Oh, that's a very wonderful piece.
Which is I just performed like about a year ago, and it's amazing, and so actually just as beautiful as the first. And it has this beautiful second. I played the original version where there's a cello, violin, piano trio sort of happening in the second movement. And of course, not nobody, but not so many people know that piece, because Tchaikovsky first became such a landmark.
Well, we actually did it here with the. Do you know Russian pianist Oksana Yablonskaya?
Oh yes, of course.
Well, this is a funny anecdote having absolutely nothing to do with music at all. But it was one of those things I remember. We were in Oxnard, and the stage crew in Oxnard, well, anyway, enough said. They forgot to lock the wheels. And behind my back, there was this scene going on. She'd play, a section, and there was an orchestral tutti. And while she was playing the piano, and she was a big woman, I'm with,
and she is
huge
so,
hands. The piano was moving further and further away from her as she was playing. So she took the piano from underneath with one hand and pulled it back to her, and then would start again. And I kept hearing the audience laughing. I thought, what's going on here? And then suddenly I remembered what happened. I mean, she told me what happened. It was very funny. Anyway, I'm sorry. It has nothing to do with anything, but it just suddenly, when you mentioned the second concerto, it came to mind. Why don't you play something else for us? What would you like to play?
Well, I'll actually play a piece by Tchaikovsky. It's from the Seasons. He had a cycle, a piano cycle with 12 pieces, and I'll play December.
I hope it's not too cold. You can hear he was a ballet composer.
Yes.
You know, and he did so many wonderful ballets, and I had the great honor and pleasure to work for a number of years at Covent Garden as music director of the Royal Ballet, and work with Rudolf Nureyev quite a bit, and Margot Fonteyn. And, you know, apropos, Tchaikovsky is a ballet composer. Very much he would work to the requirements of the dance in producing whatever number of bars or pieces they would require to dance. But that was a long time ago. And at one point, Nureyev came up to me, and it was Swan Lake. And he said, Boris, please, I would like to do 32 fuetes here in the middle. So I said, yes. He said, well, you put some music, please, behind. We'll use some music behind. Need music. So I said, well, what would you like me to do? Compose Tchaikovsky? I mean, what do you want me to do? Yes, I need the 32, I have wanted to do 32 bars of fuetes. So I found some extra music, and we repeated here and there. We made it work. But it was amazing to the extent it became the slave of the dance. And I think one of the most marvelous things about playing with repertoire like this is that you are free from that, and you can, in a sense, create your own musical choreography, as it were. And so it's wonderful to hear you do that, and I'm looking forward to participating with you in that. As of course, with an orchestra, you're kind of schlepping along in an articulated lorry, a big truck behind you. But so it's not quite so easy.
I got some cadences.
That's okay. No, that's okay. But I mean, I encourage you to do that, because I like, you know, the act of following. We think always, we use the word following, but you don't follow because it's too late. It's already happened. The moment you follow it, forget it. So it's a question of anticipation. And it's a kind of ballet that the soloist and the conductor are involved in. It's like dancing with somebody and anticipating what their next step is going to be and being able to react to it in a way that you actually do come together with it, even though you're thinking, kind of guessing what's going to happen before guessing accurately. But I want to talk about accurately for a moment, because I think today, again with records, we are so accustomed to hearing people playing note perfect that we almost accept it. You know, it has to be perfect. Every note has to be like a little jewel, and heaven forbid you should play a wrong note. You know, the earth will fall apart. This really, well, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to say myself, but do you not find this a bit constraining?
I do, and I try not to think about it. And
I'm sure you do. Yes. It's a very good answer.
The truth is, you can never, you know, we're not machines, we're not robots. I mean, you work, you practice, you know, to try to be the best you can. But, you know, there are different circumstances there. You know, for pianists, of course, you know, we come with the major problem. It's different instruments. You know, we can't carry the piano around with us. So therefore, you know, it's, you know, sometimes not the perfect instrument, and you have to make it work. I don't really, as a like listener myself, I go to performances, and I never listen to wrong notes. I listen to the performance itself, whether it moves me, whether there's something special. In other words, I sort of look at it as pretty much a music lover. I don't, you know, it's black and white. Either I like it or I don't. And, you know, if the performance doesn't move me, if I start thinking about laundry or, oh, I forgot to iron the shirt or something like that, that is not a successful performance for me. For me, you know, if I hear somebody inspiring, you know, I don't care, you know, so there were a few wrong notes. And on the other hand, listening to those perfect recordings, the kind of sterile, you know, I find them boring. You know, I myself always tried, and I've hopefully succeeded in some of them, you know, when I recorded, is to try to kind of put myself in a situation, I'm still performing for an audience. Like in my mind, I would play through a piece, and I would still try to recapture that energy, which is really hard because you're an empty hall and there are only microphones, and then there's a voice of God, because usually the sound engineer talks to you through the little speaker. So, but I always try to get to that place, because, you know, that way the performance on the recording would be great. And wrong notes, you know, I mean, everybody, you know, people had such, you know, stories about memory lapses and all sorts of things, you know. You can just, you know, if you really want no wrong notes, then you should, use one of those pianos that plays on its own, why do you need to have an artist,
But it does create an expectation in the listener. I mean, there's no question of it. It creates an expectation that if all of a sudden something happens. I mean, let's face it, to a large extent, most of our audiences are, in the best sense of the words, amateurs. Mm-hmm. They're there because they love music. They may not know a lot about it, but and it doesn't matter that they don't know. They can still tell. I mean, the great artists of today are not created by PR firms. They're created by audiences who are excited by performances and want to come and listen to that person again, excited by the personality of the artist. I would venture to say that if I gave out a very simple melody to most audiences that I perform for, both in Europe and here, and said, okay, sing this, please, that most of the people in the audience couldn't. Would I be right? So, in a sense, and that's not important. I don't expect that. I mean, I think that if we had a situation where we had individuals in the audiences who really knew everything, you'd have an audience with paralysis from analysis. I mean, nobody would actually ever enjoy anything because everybody would be looking, to see what and I love critics who come to performances with scores.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we have one in Canada where I live who insists on having a light provided for him so he can read his score and a place for his computer so he can write at the same time. So heaven forbid he should forget where the wrong notes were. And it kind of destroys, in a way, the performance. I agree with you. I think you have to take chances. And for me, it's all about taking chances. Performance is taking chances. If you don't risk, there's no reward. You just have got to risk. And if you can risk successfully and pull it off, well, that's wonderful. And if it doesn't quite happen, well, it doesn't quite happen. I mean, it's not the end of the world. But somebody like Rubinstein, for example, stopped his career at one point because the Columbia artist said to him, you can't go on performing like this. You're just playing too many wrong notes. And so he stopped and spent 3 years sort of coming back to all of these Chopin pieces and working the repertoire and really trying to make his performances more note perfect.
Yeah.
My own feeling is that it doesn't matter. And in a way, it is that kind of not knowing what's going to happen, the unknown, that makes the sport, if I can call it, of attending concerts fun. Because you have no idea whether the performance is going to derail itself or not. You expect that it might not, but there's always the chance that it will. And that should attract more people to come. I mean, after all, the thing I love, in Toronto, and we have a fly flying around here, in Toronto, there's been a movement away from music criticism. And I think it's true here, too. I mean, if the Los Angeles Times doesn't review anymore, it doesn't review our performances at all, ever, anymore, and they don't review every performance of the LA Philharmonic either. And when I went to see the editor, and I said, why are you doing this? And he said, well, unless the performance is repeated, there's no need. Because, I mean, the audience, there's nobody to hear, to be encouraged to attend or to criticize it, and therefore to affect it by not coming. And I said, well, if you go to a game of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, it only happens once, yet pages and pages of information get reported all over the place. I mean, tell me what the difference is. He said, oh, well, that's sport. That's different. That has a big audience. We're going to capture people. Everybody's interested in the personalities. But music, well, if it doesn't happen at least twice more after it, we don't want to send a reviewer. So in many ways, it's kind of sad. You have to deal with that. You talked about the fact that you sort of touched on the fact that you have the problem of instruments. That in a sense, you don't carry your own instruments around. How does that affect you?
I try actually, so it doesn't affect me really. I mean, that's, I succeed if it doesn't. There are a few cases when it does, but a part of profession, part of being pianist is actually being able to adapt to almost any instrument. And I had a good school in terms of that, because when I was, growing up in Soviet Union, I used to travel a lot with our teacher. We used to go to to do tryouts, concerts, in like smaller towns. And those smaller towns were really appreciative of us coming and performing. But a lot of times, you would play on really old beat-up pianos, that there used to be this piano. I'm sure they don't make it anymore. It was called Red October. And it was a piece of wood, really. It was horrible.
Flower planter.
Yeah. And it came actually in 3 colors. It was red, blue, and black. I'm not exaggerating. And red, it's like red. This is nice compared to that. It's like, and I remember I was maybe 13 or something, and we did a performance, and I came out on stage. We came in late. Our train was delayed, so by the time we arrived to the hall, it was time to start. So nobody really tried the piano, so we didn't know what we were dealing with. And I came out on stage, and there it was, a 9-foot red piano. And I literally felt like I was a bull. I could not concentrate.
Or a matador.
Yes. Well, one or the other, yes. But the thing is, I could not concentrate. I spent the whole performance looking at that color and not believing it. And so, of course, the performance was terrible. But that taught me, it's like, well, I have to be ready for something like that, though it's unlikely that I will actually come across another red piano. But
you never can tell.
Yes. So, but it's that kind of experiences that teaches you that, you need to, different acoustics, different instruments. Sometimes not all the notes work, and you just have to make it work.
No, of course this is very true. And any other instrumentalist, you carry your violin with you and everywhere. And there are certain pianists who are able, who say,
able.
okay.
It's an expensive thing to do.
Well, and you have to have that kind of power, attractive power, from the standpoint of the audience, so that your demands can be met. Your rider, as it were, to schlep the piano along with you. Van Cliburn came with his own piano.
Van Cliburn, Horowitz used to travel with his own piano.
And we had to pay for the shipping of the piano. He played for us for nothing in the end. But that for nothing was very costly by the time we paid airfares and private planes and shipping the piano back and forth. Free can sometimes be quite expensive. Have you prepared something else you'd like to play?
Sure. I'll do a piece that I'm sure you will recognize, and I'm sure you can actually hum the melody. It's also by Russian composer Rachmaninoff.
Pianistically, what are the demands? I mean, listening to that reminded me, of course, of the fact that Rachmaninoff was a wonderful pianist and had huge hands.
Yes.
And, you know, his hand could span a 12th easily, which, of course, most of us can't do. What are the kind of demands made upon you in the Tchaikovsky pianistically?
It's pretty much the same as Rachmaninoff. You know, it's not as many notes, of course, but it's of course very virtuosic, and not sometimes just because there are certain passages that are fast and you know you need to work on them. I think the virtuosity also requires you to find interesting colors. You know, both Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, their field of you know, palette is so vast, you know, from pianissimo, and pianissimo can be different, those different shades of pianissimo, to fortissimo. And I think for me, one of the most important things actually as a pianist, you know, to get that fortissimo that doesn't sound too harsh, you know. I mean, it's very easy to hit the piano and it will actually react the same way. It will just sound sort of like this. But to be able to find that sound that's big, you know, that's round, that's one of the challenges, I think.
Well, I think that's one of the challenges of being a pianist to begin with. Because, I mean, it is a percussion instrument. That's what it is. A hammer hits a string. And how long that reverberation lasts, one can, in fact, create a legato in a phrase by the way in which your touch affects that hammer hitting that string. It's hard to understand or to explain, but it is true, and you sense that. Particularly in long melodies, you feel that need to unlike a string instrument where you're consistently creating this legato because you
can hold it.
And you know you have all these little hairs in the bow that are continually, in a sense, plucking or reverberating that string, allowing that string to reverberate. And here you have only one choice: you hit it once, and that's it. To what extent is your technique different in a work like Tchaikovsky, for example, and that of a Clementi sonata?
It's just bigger. I mean, I honestly don't, you know, it's hard for me to compare. I mean, of course, you know, it's a completely different world. You know, it's completely different passage work. It's, you know, just from the technical standpoint, you know, it's different fingering, different touch, you know, it's lighter. And then, you know, in Russian music like Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, you know, everything is bigger. You have bigger chords, you know, so therefore, you know, it's more physical rather than intellectual. I would say playing Scarlatti Sonata, it's virtuosic, but it's also very intellectual. Not to say that, you know, playing Tchaikovsky isn't intellectual, but it's I would say more emotional.
Of course.
More emotional and physical. It's very raw in comparison of, you know, let's say playing Beethoven sonata. There's more reserve, you know, in Tchaikovsky. You know,
you sort of let it all hang out in a way.
Yes, and you know, sincerity, I would say, probably plays a big part. You know, you will not move the audience by playing Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff concertos, you know, unless you're sincere about this music, unless it really comes from the soul, you know. And I guess, you know, there's a lot of, you know, people that say something about Russian soul, you know, being so sort of deep and you know, it kind of is true.
And dark.
Dark, yes.
And I mean, even as a fellow Russian, way back when.
This prelude that I just played, I mean, this is certainly, and this is one of the first creations of Rachmaninoff. You know, this is Opus 3, so he was, I believe, 18 years old. And amazing. Already, first of all, what's amazing is so early he has his own voice. You know, a lot of composers spend quite amount of time until they get to that point when they have their own voice. This is already clearly Rachmaninoff right from the start. Not only his voice, but, you know, that darkness, the depth of certainly not happy music.
Well, we've really had an opportunity, I think, to peer into the depth of your soul during this 1 hour we've spent together, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I look forward to the rehearsal and to the performances. Thank you so much, Vassily Primakov.
Thank you.